Good evening, everybody. How are you? This is Enrique, Director of Spanish United. Tonight, we have a very special guest. Please introduce yourself to the audience so that way the audience knows who's going to be on the show tonight.
Mhm. My name is Rabbi Asher Meza. I am the founder of Torah Judaism International. My website is torahjudaism.com. I run an organization that educates people about Judaism, no matter who their parent happens to be. That means we educate people with a Jewish background, people without Jewish backgrounds, and we encourage them all to become Jewish. I don't know if that's good enough for now.
No, that's perfectly fine, and I believe that you are doing a very excellent mitzvah because not too many branches of Judaism proselytize to people is actually discouraged. But I think you're doing actually a wonderful thing because there's a lot of sincere converts that would love to be Jewish, but because of bureaucracy and red tape, they find it difficult. So I really commend you for for doing so.
Thank you.
Um, I myself come from a Jewish background. My parents are Sephardic, both Spanish Jews. I was, secular, and then I became a Baal Teshuva about 10 years ago. I was living in a frum Shomer Shabbat lifestyle up until like 3 years ago. I became off the dreck. But the whole purpose of tonight's topic is going to be discussing on how the Jewish community and the Hispanic community can improve their relations, and at the same time to educate Hispanics about their Jewish background, because a lot of Hispanics, as you might well know, because of 800 years of Muslim rule, Spain it had a golden age, or what I say, a renaissance, and most of the great Hakanim of Spain at that time, like the Rambam, Yosef Caro, all the great rabbis that came from Spain. So I would love to see the Jewish community at large reconcile with the Hispanic community, and also try to bring the Hispanic community to recognize their Jewish roots. So I also see that you do a lot of outreach with Hispanic people, and I wanted to ask you a few questions on how Hispanic people take about discovering their Jewish heritage or learning about Judaism. What's your take on that?
I don't really see a conflict between being Jewish and being Hispanic. Someone could be Hispanic and be Jewish. If you mean regarding the Jewish ethnicity, the Jewish community, well, they have a problem with anyone not from New York, at least in America.
Mhm.
Regarding people who claim to be Bnei Anusim or a descendant of the Marranos, I encourage all those people to convert. I personally don't entertain that idea. I think that if someone has some Jewish pedigree going back, it's kind of hard in any way to prove it, especially to prove it in a halachic manner that for the last 500 years, you had a Jewish mother throughout your line. So I think it's better to just convert. I don't think that blood means that much in the Jewish world, or essentially means anything in
Mhm.
God's perspective. So if somebody tells me they converted, and if someone tells me they have Jewish heritage, I would take the one that deals with sincere belief and practice over one that is just tied to some lineage, because it means nothing to have a Jewish pedigree if you don't believe in Torah. But if all you have is Torah belief and observance, and you have it all.
Mhm.
So this is why I'm not a big supporter of the idea of Bnei Anusim demanding special treatment amongst the Jewish people.
Mhm. Right, of course. No, the reason why I say that because I see that a lot of Russian Jews that are from the former Soviet Union, where many are not even halakhically Jewish, they seem to be more embraced in the Jewish community, and many of them don't even follow Judaism or don't have nothing to do with it. While you have sincere Bnei Anusim that want to be Jewish, I mean, they do want to convert, but from what I've seen, from my experience with people that I've spoken to, is like they face so many obstacles.
So let's compare both groups. Those coming from the former Soviet Union could at least remember a grandparent's. Their disconnect from Judaism didn't occur further back than 50 years or 60, I mean, sometimes even 20 years. I'm talking about the ones who aren't halakhically Jewish, because Israel does allow people who have a Jewish father to make aliyah, or I guess in this case, a Jewish grandparent, a Jewish grandfather. While people who claim to be Bnei Anusim, I really don't see in the vast majority of cases how there's any connection between people in Latin America and those who were exiled from Spain 500 years ago. Regardless, in my opinion, they both should be made to convert. The problem is conversion has such a stigma to it nowadays that just to think that someone has to go through the horrors of conversion is enough to get anyone to lie and say, oh, no, I'm a born Jew, just so they won't have to be tortured. Because that's essentially what's done nowadays. Converts are mistreated. But if people kept Jewish law the way it was meant to be kept, that converts are to be elevated and praised, I don't think you would have so many people making the case that they're ethnically, genetically Jewish and thus should be let in. No, they would be fine with converting if the idea of conversion wasn't such a gruesome one. Why is there a double standard? Probably because there's less of a gap by Soviet Jews or Russian Jews in terms of their Jewish lineage compared to what you have within the Hispanic community that's claiming a connection 500 years ago. And also, a lot of these Hispanics were Christian. There isn't actual proof. They don't have ketubas. They don't have Jewish descendants that could vouch for their Jewishness. I mean, in the Soviet Union, I mean, Chabad was greatly involved in that place. And it's not too hard for a Russian to play Jewish geography and say, well, this person knew my grandfather and that person knew my aunt. While in the Hispanic community, the most they could point to in the vast majority of cases is perhaps a tradition that their grandma may have had of lighting candles before the Sabbath or something like that. This is why essentially there's a double standard.
Okay. No, the reason why I asked, because I follow a lot with what goes on with the Ben Anusim and then also with the Russian Jews. I've seen that a lot of Ben Anusim do have a Jewish ancestry. Like, I'm not sure if you're aware of that. A lot of Spanish names actually have a Jewish title to it at the end. If you look at the EZ, like Lopez or Sanchez or Martinez, that has the EZ at the end, and there is like a genealogy.
Yeah, we're still going back 500 years. There's many natives who took the names of conquistadors when they arrived in the Americas. Just like many blacks, virtually all blacks in America, if they have an Anglo-sounding last name, is because that was the name of their slave master.
Right.
I don't think that's enough for someone to claim to be Bnei Anusim. And the only reason they make such a big deal about being genetically Jewish is because they bought into the notion that blood means something.
Right.
That just because you happen to have a Jewish ancestor, that means that you're in some way more important to God than someone who doesn't.
Right.
I mean, assuming that you both want to keep Torah. That's
the same argument could be said about Russian Jews. Like, if you really look at it, a lot of Russian Jews that immigrated to made Aliyah to Israel after the Soviet Union collapse, a lot of them purchased their documents on the black market. As you know, the Soviet Union, when that collapsed, it was a huge mess. You had a lot of people that had connections with organized crime that they were able to buy paperwork to get to Israel. So there's been many cases of Russian neo-Nazi cells in Israel that are composed.
Oh yeah, but they're not religious.
They're not. They are not.
They don't
religious.
claim to be religious.
Right, of course.
While Bnei Anusim, 9 out of 10 times are deeply religious when they come to the doors of the Jewish Agency or any organization that's trying to help them make Aliyah. They're typically former Christians who have embraced the Jewish religion because of their Christianity. I'm not saying they still believe in Jesus, but that is what brought them there. So, yeah, the average Russian Jew is moving to the state of Israel basically for economic gain in the vast majority of cases. I mean, also, there are many of them that feel some connection to their pedigree. That's fine as well. This is why there's a distinction. Now, Israel is a secular country, so it prefers people who are less religious than South Americans just because they're going to send their kids to the army. They're not going to protest when buses run on Shabbat, right? But when someone from South America wants to be let in just because they claim to be from a people who were exiled 500 years ago, when they essentially have no proof. Some have, but it's very, very rare.
Okay. And how would you explain the Hispanophobia that's within the Jewish community? Would you say it's rampant, or do you think it's just segregated within certain communities like the Hasidic or the Haredi communities?
I don't see any type of Hispanophobia, just because I've been to South America. I've been to the Jewish communities of Mexico and Colombia and Panama, and there's a very vibrant Jewish community. I mean, there's a huge Syrian community in Panama, also in Mexico City, in Colombia as well, also Syrian, but they have Sephardim, they have Lubavitch all over South America. And the people who attend these synagogues are essentially, Hispanic in terms of an ethnicity. They're typically European or Sephardi, right? But by Hispanic phobia, you mean native?
In the United States.
People who are native?
I'm talking about within the United States, and I'm not talking about in the diaspora. From what I've seen, that within the Jewish community, not all, but in some sectors, I have witnessed a lot of Hispanophobia. I don't know if it has to do because they see Hispanics as subservient, or is it because of the history of Catholicism? But, I have seen a lot of Hispanophobia, and I believe that the Jewish community could do a lot of good by engaging with the Hispanic community, because as you and I know, anti-Semitism is run amok. And I believe that in order to combat anti-Semitism, is a good thing to accept and welcome others and educate them about what they're about, because most of the anti-Semitism that you see among the Hispanic community comes from, immigrant groups, not so much, Hispanic born Americans, but you see it a lot with Hispanics that come from immigrant communities, and in many parts of America, I've seen that in many places, a lot of Hispanic workers are mistreated very badly, and that fuels that Hispanophobia. I would like to see like an engagement between the Jewish community of all backgrounds, doesn't matter they're religious or secular, and with the Jewish and also with the Hispanic community, and try to create some type of mutual understanding. That's something that my organization, Spanish United, does. We are not political. We're not affiliated with any religious belief or political party. We have actually a lot of Hispanic Jews that are part of the movement as well. And, I would like to see, better relationships between the Jewish community in America and the Hispanic community in America as well. That's what I meant by Hispanophobia. I'm referring to the Jewish community here in the States.
So you mean the Jewish community and the non-Jewish Hispanic community?
That is correct.
So you're dealing more with an ethnicity, like not necessarily a religion. What Judaism suffers from, and this is something that affects all belief systems who have an ethnic identity in any country, is it's what's called xenophobia. So xenophobia is more like the fear of the unknown.
Correct.
Being that the vast majority of Jews in America are Ashkenazi, right? In Israel is the opposite. The vast majority of people in Israel are Sephardi. Right, but the vast majority of Jews in America,
and Mizrahi as well, and in Israel, it's Mizrahi and Sephardi in Israel. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, Mizrahi are lumped in as Sephardi, right? I mean, there aren't too many Jews from Spain in Israel. For some reason, even like the Nusach, the prayer book, is called Edot HaMizrach, and that's by the Sephardi chief rabbi. And I mean, what does Rav Ovadia Yosef have to do with Spain, right? I mean, he's from Iraq,
right?
Iraq. I think he's from Baghdad. Yeah, so it's the same thing in Israel. So. I don't see that the Hispanic community has much in common with the Jewish community. And I'm talking about from an ethnic perspective. Now, I don't think that's because they hate Hispanics or anything. So you're dealing with two different class of people. Jews are typically very hyper-educated in the vast majority of cases.
Correct.
They perhaps in California, they may vote on the same side, right? I mean, most Jews are on the left. Most Hispanics, at least in California, are on the left. I'm in Florida here. Most Hispanics are on the right because
the Cuban
predominantly Cuban. Right, correct. I don't see why there is a need to in some way bridge a gap when these people really have nothing in common. What does an ethnic Jew have? I mean, it's like, why should someone strive to build bridges between the Jewish and the Asian community? Yes, we live in the same state or in the same country, so we at least deserve either mutual tolerance or mutual respect. But
Right.
in terms of getting us to get along, I don't see that gap is bridgeable. If a Hispanic wants to be involved in the Jewish community, he could just convert. And I'll tell you, if a Hispanic person converts, he'll have a lot easier time than if a Black person converts.
Right.
And mainly because there are people in the Jewish world who look Hispanic, right? They
Right.
have dark features, like you
Right.
mentioned, Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews. While, let's say, an Asian or a Black individual, they'll have a harder time. But once they do get accepted in the community, they're accepted, right? I mean, there's always going to be people who are going to mistreat you because you look different. Okay?
Right.
You can't avoid that anywhere.
Mhm.
But to say that big efforts have to be made to build bridges between the Jewish and the Hispanic community, they really don't have much in common, right? I mean, I think Jews have more in common with Asians regarding their habits and their appreciation for classical music in most
Right.
cases.
My concern, or excuse me, interrupt you, Rabbi. My concern is that Hispanics demographically are growing throughout the United States. Doesn't matter if it's California, Florida, or even Alabama. They are growing demographically. The white community is shrinking. Even the Black community is shrinking. And the whole thing that I'm trying to emphasize is that Hispanics are going to be like a third group, and in many cases, Hispanics don't have representation. They don't even have a voice or vote because Hispanics are not categorized as a race; they're categorized as an ethnicity. But in many cases, they're categorized as a race because of their culture, language, and national origin. The reason why I bring it up because the Hispanic community, I feel, can become radicalized in two ways, either through Islamic extremism, which you have a lot of Islamists that are trying to convert many Hispanics to their fundamentalist version of Islam, and then you have Christian fundamentalist groups like Christian Identity and a lot of fundamentalist sects that want to convert them to their form of Christianity. My point is that Hispanics have a tendency to be radicalized. And you said it in a video a couple of years ago, because I've been following your stuff for many years, that many Jews have made the mistake that because they don't proselytize, that Gentiles don't matter. But you had mentioned in a video that someone that was an Islamist could have been a Torah observant Jew if he was given the opportunity to learn Torah. And as you know, according to Halakha, there is no prohibition in proselytizing. I believe that if the Hispanic community and the Jewish community don't engage each other, there might be a danger in the future that Hispanics might persecute Jews in America. That's the only reason why I'm saying that they should engage. I'm not saying that they should be buddies or hang out or be friends, but I believe that I come from an education background. And one of the things that I teach my students is that I teach critical thinking, reasoning, investigate everything, look at your facts, and then come up to your own conclusions. Because I believe that knowing about what the other person is thinking or believes would also help to dispel any prejudices that you may have. It doesn't mean that you're going to be friends with them, but you won't look at them with hostility.
Because you brought Muslims into the mix and fundamentalist Christians. These are belief systems. These are essentially religions that could latch on to any ethnicity. When you mention Jewish, you mention them as an ethnicity, not as a religion. So,
well, they're both. They can be either a religion or ethnicity. Jews are a ethno-religious group, meaning that they could be both a religion,
but I don't want the vast majority of Jews to proselytize, because the vast majority of Jews would proselytize irreligious values because they're irreligious. So I don't know why making a bridge. You're interviewing someone who's right of center. I'm actually pretty right of center.
No, that's fine.
The last thing I want to see are Hispanics becoming radicalized by Jews, because the Jews who are radical out there are typically irreligious. Heck, well, even Antifa that has a Jewish wing.
Hmm.
I don't think
You
the
have
ethnicity.
radicals, and you also have radicals among the right. Like you have a lot of the Haredi Jews in Israel, that are no different than the
No,
Islamists.
correct. But I consider myself on the right. So this is
Hmm.
why, I mean, like from my perspective, I don't want ethnic Jews trying to influence Hispanics who typically are more conservative socially than the average Jew. The average person who comes from Mexico is more grounded with biblical values than the average Jew in America.
Right.
The Jews I want influencing Hispanics are the religious Jews.
Right. Of course.
I believe what's good for me is good for others. So then I want them to have a more sophisticated view on the Bible and on the God of Israel, i.e., by becoming Israel themselves. But regarding the ethnic Jewish community, I want them as far away from Hispanics as possible. And I support the Lexit movement and the Latinos leaving the Democratic Party movement.
Hmm.
I'm actually a member of Latinos for Trump, and I'm also a Proud Boy.
Hmm.
So
I don't judge
don't
you.
view
Like
the.
I said, this is
Oh
not a
no,
political group. That's why I'm talking to you.
I'm telling you why I think the way I do. I don't think the vast majority of Jews in America speak in behalf of Torah. So this
That's
is
true.
why I don't think that there should be more bridges made, but less, essentially. I mean, I would like to make Hispanics more conservative,
Hmm.
more knowledgeable with what the Bible has to say on everyday issues, than to make them more ethnically Jewish or more accepted in the Jewish world. And I'll tell you, ethnic Jews are very welcoming. They're very into marketing their ideas to other people, whether it's the Black community, the Spanish community, the Asian community. Asians, when they come to this country, they're typically pretty
Insular.
conservative, but the next generation is pretty left wing,
Right.
just
Of course.
because you're dealing with the people, just like Jews, who are very studious. That means because they attend the same universities, they get indoctrinated in the same way,
Right.
by college professors who are typically on the left and not on the right.
Right. That's what happens usually with people with any group that becomes prosperous. The more educated and wealthy they become, the less observant they become. It's like the Jews that came to America almost 300 years ago. The original were religious, but over time they wanted to assimilate because of pressure of assimilation. So they just started to give up many of their practices. That's where the Reform, the Conservative, and the Reconstructionist movement came out, which kind of became like a substitute towards Orthodoxy. And most Jews today even have English sounding names because they wanted to assimilate. From what I see among the conservatives in general is that they want people to assimilate. It's like if you assimilate, you automatically get privileges of becoming wealthy, becoming affluent. And over time, that could be productive. At the same time, it could be unproductive because they start to lose their identity, they start to lose their culture and their values. And that's what's happened with all groups, with all white Americans. Doesn't matter what ethnic group they belong to. Within a generation, until they have completely lost their identity. And from what I see with Hispanics, is that there was like a lot of pressure with Hispanics to assimilate, because a lot of people fear that that they won't assimilate and they might be a problem, like what you see with many of the Muslims, like you see like in Europe, where many of them have been there for like one or two generations. They don't speak the language, they're not assimilated, and then they get radicalized by radical imams. So it's like the same thing with Hispanic people. A lot of
So you want them to assimilate, right?
I want them to assimilate to a degree, but at the same time, I also want them to keep their identity. It's like I believe it's very important to keep their identity. The same way with Jews. I think religious Jews throughout the diaspora, I really commend them because they're the only ones that are keeping Jewish identity alive by not intermarrying, by speaking Hebrew, by keeping Shabbat.
Okay, so Jewish identity and Torah identity is two different things. I'm all for de-ethnicizing Judaism. I think that everyone should, especially in America, choose what ethnicity they want to become. This notion that you should remember where you come from, I disagree completely. Heck, I'm a convert to Judaism. I made Aliyah. I'm an Israeli citizen and an American citizen. If I was proud essentially of where my parents came from. I'd moved back to Colombia. I mean, I don't hate Colombia, and there are many things I enjoy about the Hispanic heritage, but I've always taught my kids that there are no inferior races on this planet, but inferior cultures. And I've chosen what I think is a superior one, and that is the American cultural system along with the Jewish one, just because I think this country has done the most with what the Bible had to offer. Right?
Mhm.
I'm not for people being proud to be Mexican or proud to be Colombian. If you're an American, that you should strive to be a good American and start identifying as an American. I'm not for people calling themselves Cuban American or Mexican American. No, you're an American. That's it. And that's not a religious status. You could be an American and a Christian American and a Jew. But this notion that someone has to be loyal to their pedigree, I'm completely against that idea. As a rule, that if
Mhm.
someone, as a rule, if they're Jamaican, they have to be proud to be Jamaican. If that was the case, they should have just stayed in Jamaica.
Right, of course. And another question I was also going to ask you concerning, I was going to say concerning the plight of Hispanics in America. Would you say their situation has improved under Trump, or do you think it has gotten worse under Trump?
Hispanics have had the lowest unemployment rates under Trump ever. In other words, they've had the highest employment rates under Trump than ever before. So this is why his base grew among Hispanics even greater than under George Bush's. I don't think anyone denies it, even for African Americans or blacks, that the economy was booming. They also had numbers, unemployment rate numbers never seen before in America. They were so low, right? There were more blacks working, there were more Hispanics working under Trump than under any other administration. So I don't think that's even up for debate.
Okay, so if that is the case, then why are there some Hispanics that believe that their situation has gotten worse? So where does that come from?
The left, the left uses ethnicities and minorities like the communists used workers. Blacks in this country think that society is systemically racist. Race relations have never been worse. And this is after a black president was voted into office twice. Only because things are actually going good for you doesn't mean that people are going to appreciate it. I think that the Democratic Party is fueled by that. They latch on to certain issues in society, race, poverty, the wage gap, to in some way justify their existence, telling these people that you need us to fight for you because society is against you. And they make them perpetual victims.
Hmm.
This is why that what you have is ingratitude. The facts don't match the lack of appreciation that Americans have for what you described in terms of financial security and, I guess, feeling safe in their homes. They're essentially taught to be ingrates by the left. So this
Hmm.
is why they may pull in a way that doesn't really match what the statistics have shown to be true, that they were doing better under Trump than under any other administration.
Hmm. Hmm. And another question I was going to ask, as far as the right is concerned, why do you believe many segments of the right, not all, but many segments, they feel that they are entitled, that everybody else needs to be grateful, just to, be here, or just to be allowed to even exist here? Where do you think that comes from?
Well, being that if you ask anyone from almost any country on this planet where would they like to live, they're typically always going to say the US. People are fighting to get into this country, and there's a reason, because of the opportunity, because it's essentially a melting pot. Before Biden got into the office, it was the most transparent government. There was less corruption here than in other places. This is why that just calls for people to be grateful. It's interesting how the average person is proud, even though their country is not so great, it's proud to be from a certain place. But Americans are made typically by the left to feel ashamed for living in a place that been really the shining light to the world. I mean, if the US would cease to exist tomorrow, I'd say China would gobble up Tibet and Russia would gobble up Georgia. And I mean, it'll be complete chaos on this planet. And I think that people should be proud to live in this country if they identify with the values of this country.
Right.
But now the reason they're not proud is because they don't identify with the values of this country. And they want to see it be dismantled, essentially, and some left-wing utopia put in its place.
You know what's interesting, because I have heard many speeches by Richard Spencer, who is actually on the right, but he's kind of a little bit interesting. He believes that that minorities that are in America should be grateful, and that minorities need white people and not the other way around, and that he would like to see a white utopia or a white ethno state, not just only in America, but throughout Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, because he was saying that that white people have contributed a lot to society, to the arts, to science. And it's true. Historically, scientifically, they have, but that doesn't mean that they're superior to everybody else. I myself consider myself to be white, even though I come from a Spanish background. But
who's defending Richard Spencer, though?
A lot of
the Republican Party.
A lot of people are.
Not okay. By a lot, you mean 100, maybe 200? You're telling me that the average Republican cares what Richard Spencer believes or teaches? As a matter of fact, they interviewed him, and he's really on the left. His views don't align with traditional right-wing views. Again, this is one person. I could say that the KKK was a child of the Democratic Party, but then you'll say not all Democrats align with the KKK. Right. But the average Republican does not endorse Richard Spencer.
And what about Jared Taylor of American Renaissance?
I don't know anything about him, but I'll tell you, the average Democrat does endorse Antifa, and they endorse BLM.
That is true.
The notion that ideas like critical race theory are taught by these two groups, and the idea is taught now in public schools, and many parents are standing up against it. An idea that teaches that all white people are racist, whether they acknowledge it or not. Honestly, who are the real bigots here? It's not the right, it's the left. Right? That what it is projection.
Right. I agree.
They do what they accuse everyone else of.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing with feminists, that they promote misandry, hatred of men, that all men are rapists, all men are violent. It's the same.
Right, and they're also Democrats.
Of course. I'm very familiar with both sides. I myself don't adhere to any political side, but I do believe that the left does a lot of bad things, and the same thing with the right.
No, but you quoted Richard Spencer. I can't even think of one prominent Republican or prominent conservative that endorses Richard Spencer. I mean, can you name one congressman, one radio talk show host, right? But you would have to acknowledge that virtually every Democrat supports the Women's March in DC, BLM, Antifa, rioting in the name of brutality or to stop police brutality or defunding police. That is almost a tenet of the Democratic Party, while there's no one who supports Richard Spencer. It's like quoting David Duke just because he happens to have run as a Republican in Louisiana, that he speaks for the Republican Party.
Rush Limbaugh, when he was around, he would support Richard Spencer.
That's not true. That is not true. You'd have to have some source that he supported Richard Spencer. Now, there's two people. There's Robert Spencer and Richard Spencer. Maybe you're confusing the two. There's one that taught against Islam and wrote a bunch of books against Islam. That's not the same Richard Spencer, the white supremacist.
Yeah, I know. It's two different people. Richard Spencer is the one that I'm talking about from the alt-right.
The only reason people know his name is because he's one of the few white supremacists who has some platform online. And he's so irrelevant. Just because he identifies as a Republican does not mean that, if you acknowledge those in this country that are preoccupied with race and blacks having all black dormitories, it's typically on the left. It's not on the right. Why would you assume that the right is racist in any way? I mean, I don't.
Well,
Yeah,
I don't
I don't see
believe
it.
all of the right is racist, but like I
No,
said,
not all.
There's
Even
a segment.
99.9%. Well, you named one person, okay? One person who identifies as a conservative.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, if that makes the right racist, then being that virtually every Democrat aligns themselves with Antifa, that makes almost every Democrat a communist supporting organization
Right,
or individual.
right, of course.
Yeah, I don't see the comparison.
You know, I judge people individually. I don't judge people by brush. That's the reason why I mentioned, you know, certain segments within the right, not all, because I have friends that are among the right that are wonderful people, but I just have a little bit of concern on the right when it comes to Hispanics, and same thing on the left, because I see that both groups, both the left and the right, there seems to be a lot of Hispanophobia between both groups, and that's something that, you know, I myself
I
as
don't
a
see it
civil
on the
activist
right.
leader,
I don't see it on the right.
I do see it. You may not see it as much, but I do see it, especially like in certain segments of the country. But a lot of it has to do with demographic change, has to do with economics. You know, they're intertwined. Well, I wanted to thank you so much for being on the show, Rabbi. I truly appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Have yourself a wonderful day. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.